A reading from the first book of Samuel. The Philistines gathered for an attack on Israel. Israel went out to engage them in battle and camped at Ebenezer, while the Philistines camped at Aphek. The Philistines then drew up in battle formation against Israel. After a fierce struggle, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who slew about 4,000 men on the battlefield. When the troops retired to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord permitted us to be defeated today by the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the Lord from Shiloh, that it may go into battle among us and save us from the grasp of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the ark of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned in the cherubim. The two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were with the ark of God. When the ark of the Lord arrived in the camp, all Israel shouted so loudly that the earth resounded. The Philistines, hearing the noise of shouting, asked, "What can this loud shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" On learning that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were frightened. They said, "Gods have come to their camp." They said also, "Woe to us! This has never happened before. Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods that struck the Egyptians with various plagues and with pestilence. Take courage and be manly, Philistines. Otherwise, you will become slaves to the Hebrews, as they were our slaves. So fight manfully." The Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated. Every man fled to his own tent. It was a disastrous defeat, into which Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. The ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were among the dead. The word of the Lord.
Thanks.
Redeem us, Lord, because of your mercy. Yet now you have cast us off and put us in disgrace, and you go not forth with our armies. You have let us be driven back by our foes. Those who hated us plundered us at will. You made us the reproach of our neighbors, the mockery and the scorn of those around us. You made us a byword among the nations, a laughingstock among the peoples. Why did you hide your face, forgetting our woe and our oppressions? For our souls are bowed down to the dust, our bodies are pressed to the earth.
Jesus preached the gospel of the kingdom and cured every disease among the people. Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Marcum.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
A leper came to him, and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched the leper, and said to him, "I will do it. Be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. Then he said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad, so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. Verbum Domini.
Laus tibi, Christe.
You know, at the time of Jesus, and even in later years, in more current years, but probably even within the last 100 years, people with leprosy were often avoided. Of course, because the disease was very contagious. In the time of Jesus, again, because according to the Mosaic law, if they were near a leper or touched a leper, they would be considered unclean. But it was also a very frightening-looking disease. I mean, the person who was in advanced stages of leprosy looked very frightening. So people stayed away from them. Well, we can learn a lot from the example of Jesus today. Jesus didn't stay away from lepers. He welcomed them. Sometimes we stay away from people. We avoid person, places, or things and look at them like they were lepers. We treat them that way. They repulse us. They disgust us. So we avoid them. Today, at the same time, Jesus gives us much courage. He shows us how to love those who are difficult to love. So again, in the time of Jesus, leprosy was a disease and it meant death. People with leprosy were often in leper colonies. They were away from society, from people. If a leper had to pass through a town or village, or a leper saw a person, they would have to declare themselves as unclean. I'm unclean. Usually they'd wear long garments, hooded, so that people wouldn't see their appearance, and so they wouldn't be scared. But in the time of Jesus, this particular type of leprosy was a mixture of various kinds of leprosy. There was what was called nodular leprosy, and there was called aesthetic leprosy. And this form of leprosy that was common in these days was, it started out with lumps, with sort of like blisters that eventually became ulcers. Often the skin would harden, sometimes turn white. There'd be a deadening of the nerves, some pain, some burning, and eventually as the nerves deadened, there was of course no pain, but then, the limbs would begin to be like claws, and, eventually fingers and toes would come off, and as the disease advanced, there was a stench with this type of disease. And of course, this was repulsive to people. I mean, it's naturally so. You don't want to see that. Again, in the Mosaic law, people were forbidden to be near a leper. And a leper was forbidden, again, to be near people. Jesus, though, goes and heals the leper, embraces him. Now, in our own lives, there are persons, places, and things we avoid. Again, we treat them like lepers. It's leprosy. Stay away. And this avoidance could be a result of perhaps unforgiveness, anger, resentments, fear of accepting certain truths about ourselves, about others, fear of rejection, fear of persecution, fear of pain. So we treat these persons, places, or things like lepers. We stay away. We're afraid. Well, St. Francis of Assisi, we can learn a lot from this example. St. Francis was also repulsed by lepers, especially before he had a conversion, a change of heart. He stayed clear from them. Would never go near a leper. Well, as the Lord touched him and as he started to grow in his love for God and prayer, eventually he would have to come face to face with a leper. And he was scared. But he did it. Put aside the fear and went face to face with a leper. And he kissed the leper. And when he kissed the leper, he stood back, and that leper was Jesus. It was Jesus there. And then today we see another example of something people usually avoid. And that is, of course, persecution, is, of course, suffering as a result of being a disciple of Jesus Christ. An example of this is the feast we celebrate today is St. Berard and companions. Now, these men, they were early Franciscans, and they were the first martyrs of the Franciscan order, called Protomartyrs. They were sent out to go and evangelize in countries that were not Christian, into the Muslim areas. Of course, they were met with harsh criticism. Eventually, they were beaten, tortured, and killed, and were martyred for love of God. Well, how do we not avoid these things that cause us fear? How do we not avoid people and all of that, or things, or truths? Well, the example, again, of St. Francis. Go to Jesus. We see them as Jesus. And we look, again, deeper into the example of Jesus Christ. So Jesus embraces the leper with compassion and with mercy. And in compassion, Jesus sees the pain. He sees the hurt of somebody. And immediately, he brings healing. And so in our own lives too, we need to look with compassion as Jesus looks upon others with compassion. Be willing to embrace a person, even if they've caused us hurt or harm. We see that they may be hurt, that they may have some pain. So we need to look at them with compassion, with charity, with love. And then the truths in our lives, those we may be willing to avoid, we're avoiding because, we're afraid of the results, we're afraid of maybe change. Well, we look again to Jesus, because when we accept these truths, Jesus is calling us closer to himself. He's raising us up in him to be more like him, to grow in a greater image and likeness of him. So look at the advantages of that. Yes, the truth hurts, but the truth makes us free. The truth, with the truth of Jesus, helps us to grow like him and to grow in love. So we embrace the truth, first and foremost, for love of God, for love of Jesus Christ. And then if we're fearing anything, fearing being persecuted, fearing being hated, fearing rejection. But they did this to Jesus. You know, look at these examples of the Protomartyrs who had such zeal. Oh, they says, well, you know, this life is temporary. You know, it'll pass away. You know, what's important is what's eternal. Is the eternal high prize, Jesus Christ, the crown of martyrdom, the crown of Jesus Christ. You know, eternal life with God forever and always. The salvation of souls, a great example. Now that's one thing is we shouldn't be afraid of suffering, because when we embrace it, yes, we become more like the Lord, but at the same time, we give a witness. And these martyrs, their witness was very effective because it created saints. I mean, one we know very well of is Saint Anthony of Padua. You know, these martyrs, after they were killed, they went out and collected their remains, and then they had a sort of like a parade, a procession of them. They were honored, revered. So they went through different countries, different villages, went through Portugal, where St. Anthony of Padua was living at the time. He wasn't a Franciscan yet, and he was an Augustinian priest. So here they go, going through Portugal, and he witnessed this procession of the martyrs, of their remains, and it touched him deeply. He says, I'm going to become a Franciscan. And eventually he joined the Franciscan order. But it touched his heart. And so we ourselves, we shouldn't fear suffering, because it gives a witness. Yes, it raises us up to the Lord, but it gives a witness of God's love, of his power, of his grace working within us. And so, my brothers and sisters, what's the answer to all this? Jesus the Lord. Come to Jesus. Look to Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. In him we find comfort, we find our consolation. And followers of him, he calls us to follow himself. He raises us up in him. So this is why we need to go to him. And in going to him, we find that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. All things, and so there's no more avoidance. So we can embrace all people for love of him, even those who are hard to love. Jesus shows us how. Now it's up to us to go to him, to be like Jesus, to pray, to rely on him, to trust on him, and to know that he's faithful and that he will do it. God bless you all.